some. Oh, wait.
Okay.
Story for another day. Hello, what's up?
So what's the story for today? Now I'm intrigued.
Sorry, I said I sort of just sat down and I started cooking at 11 o'clock for dinner tonight. So I've got an hour, unless the alarm goes, for taking something out.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So I want to show you what I've been doing today. I've been doing this. This is the master file of Future of Text 1 in InDesign. So I copy, go over to author, paste, then I go through and make sure all the indents are correct. See, it's highly intellectual work. And so this takes forever. Don't worry, I'm not going to do the whole book now. Anyway, so I keep doing that, make sure that breaks aren't there. So far I've got 67,000 words in here.
Is this one of these mindfulness movies where we watch you quietly work through the document for an hour?
If you want to watch me do this, you have to pay. Okay, it's just, I need a contract that I didn't force you, so. But, so the thing is, what I've done is, the name of the person is level 1. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with having the introduction and stuff like that, but that doesn't matter. Point is, when I paste it in, so level 2 is the heading, so we can do this, right?
Yep.
So when I paste it in, I command click. This is something an ordinary user doesn't need to know. On the name, click show options, and I paste their name in the contributing authors. So that is how readers should know that if you copy this, it should assign that person as the author, but that doesn't actually work. It worked for a while, but it doesn't always work. So if I do Barbara B, new document here, and I paste it, it's me. But at least I'm the editor, so I'm going to have to talk to Jacob about getting that done right. So the reason I'm mentioning this here, guys, is I had a discussion with Raphael earlier today. He is helping do the social media marketing of the book. And he agreed that the first book has 180 contributors, the second one has 30. So instead of having volume 1 and volume 2, we're going to do it, unless you guys have a reason not to, we'll do editions. There's the original 2020 edition. And now this, I see some nodding, that's nice. So the idea is once I put everybody in here, then we do the 2021 edition, additions, and release this, because then also we can delete the old timeline, put the new timeline in. So all of these will remain unedited. But then I think I have to pay someone, I can't do it myself. Some of these have, they're so rude, they actually have references, those academic types. So that has to be coded into liquid, the .liquid format. So that's going to take so long. But anyway, that means that we'll be able to do the Mark Anderson style click on citation to get it. Anyway, Eric is here. Eric is a friend who is interested in the community, but he wasn't sure if he would have much to discuss. But I said it's nice people, so he can come and hang out, and hopefully he has a whiskey glass or a coffee or a water or something. I don't know. So yeah.
Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Hey, Brendan, I see your supervisor joined us for a moment.
Yeah, he's keeping watch on me today.
But I'm not able to activate my video. I
thought you were wearing gray.
No. Oh, wait.
So it's not a fashion statement then. So anyway, I just wanted you all to know that. And Adam, this is one of the reasons I haven't been able to think much about your visualization beyond our call on Monday, which was really lovely. And I managed to see my supervisor today, which was a bit of a miracle, Les. Don't know how that happened, but he signed up on my final thing for my PhD, which is expert interviews. So once he signed up for ethics approval to be considered. So once that's done, I will contact probably all of you and ask if I can interview you in a semi-structured way about visual meta. And then I can graduate, or whatever they call it. What do you call it, Mark, when you get your PhD? It's not called graduating. It's called, oh my God.
I don't know. I think it's called mainly being relieved, actually, is my main recollection. So I haven't actually, well, I suppose I'm planning to go to graduation this winter, because I think it's the first one back in person again. I really couldn't see the point of turning up on a Zoom call. Somehow I didn't think that was giving closure.
Oh, Mark, then we may graduate together. That's romantic. But yeah, there are other people in the room. So, Adam, do you want to, since Eric is here, shall we use Eric as an excuse to have a little revisit of your little green rectangles, because it's just such a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I'm a bit under the surface this week. My cold is getting stronger, or I got another one. My family is. It feels like this is an Asian wet market here. I get so many viruses.
Right.
And also a friend died, so I'm a bit under the.
Wow.
I mean, not in top shape.
Sorry to hear that. Unfortunately,
I just wanted to join in anyway too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here, Adam, and unfortunately I know how that feels, so that's terrible. So yeah, glad you're here. Glad you're here. Brendan, Peter, do you want to push the discussion in some specific direction? Otherwise, I'll just, blabber on.
I've got a few questions for you, Frode, and I caught up to Monday's session, which was pretty fantastic. I was there with regards to the design discussion around what you're building, Adam. First question though, I suppose, what are you looking for in these expert interviews with your PhD? I'm in the midst of kind of my own project where I was thinking about reaching out to many of you for some interviews. So I'm curious to see if there's any overlap there.
Okay, that's an easy question. I feel really, really strongly a couple of things, and this answer is roughly here. I feel that if we don't augment our text as a species, we're fucked. I saw today that our queen is irritated with political leaders who are not acting on climate change, which is wonderful, because I have so many right-wing-ish friends from childhood, some through military and so on, who say, oh, I don't support climate extinction rebellion, they're not protesting in the right way, all that bullshit. So that's frightening, right? There are bad ways to protest, but speaking out loudly is important. So speaking and, one of the interviews I did with the former Bosnian Prime Minister last week, excuse me, I'm so sorry. He said that if I want to make a political change, I speak on television. If I want it to be for the ages, I write it down. So important political discourse even is written. So much of the way, as we discuss in this community, is thinking while you're writing. What does a good teacher say to a student who has an idea? Write it down. If it doesn't survive the crystallizing process of writing, it's just not coherent. So that is something that I think is species level important. And in order to make this happen, I think it is so important that documents have some connectivity. Currently, they have none. This is why visual meta was born, of course. So all my expert interviews are basically about presenting the software, because that's an implementation of it. The software includes author and reader, but also what Adam has done, also what ACM is, because it is an open system. And then at the end of it, while, going back and forth of, do you have any issues? What do you think our problems will be? Is to say, do you also think this is an important thing? And can you help us make it real? And either they will say yes, or if they say no, that'll also be very, very interesting, because then I'll find out why. If there is something better than visual meta, fantastic. I don't want to dedicate my life to some technical stuff, but currently we don't have it. So the expert interviews are a desperate cry for help that'll help put the validation section of my PhD into closure. I did a survey of 200 paid students, not a lot paid, online, which gave really rave things. Wow, 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 we like it. But now it's more for people whom I know a little bit, like you guys, you can say, yeah, this is a great idea, but. And every time you have that little but, that's what the academics want to see. They want to see that it's been properly looked through.
Mhm.
Does that overly answer your question?
That's perfect. And you know, we've discussed a little bit in the past some of the doing, but it's got a heavy overlap around how we synthesize. You know, that really kind of going through the act of taking disparate parts of information and bringing them together into a refined model of something new. And I know many of us are, you know, advanced tool users here. Peter, I've heard extensively about, you know, your use of Tinderbox, and Mark likewise. So this is kind of, we're entering into the phase of qualitative interviews on our side too. So if any of you are open to this, I will shoot you a note and perhaps link up for a conversation. It's been rather fun. We've done a number of them already and are trying to identify some different almost personas or user groups that how they use advanced tooling, how people do not, and still kind of end up with a bit of synthesis that is truly unique and original. So yeah, I appreciate that, Mark.
Is this for study? Just so I'm interested.
This is a funded project
Okay,
that
cool.
I'm working on. So yeah, it's kind of all around the realm of knowledge synthesis, and then where does the future kind of hold for us in terms of accelerating expert understanding of information and kind of driving innovation.
I'll happily out myself as having views on this subject, so I'm more than happy to talk.
Very cool. Yeah, and it's as mentioned, it's been really insightful just picking into people's patterns of how they you know, do annotations or how they kind of read through what kind of active reading methods they use. So yeah, that's been quite enjoyable.
Do you have anything to share so far on
there's surely indications that we can accelerate learning. That's kind of the broad hypothesis that we've been able to start to validate a bit. And a lot of the affordances and advanced network notebooks are not necessarily being leveraged in the way that we can kind of build a top and construct synthesis. So that's kind of a point of my background as a designer, of trying to understand how we can kind of bring the next generation of notebook tools of it's the best way to frame it. Really kind of taking what we've learned with things like Rome and Obsidian in kind of this mid-tier way, looking back at things like HyperCard and Tinderbox and a number of the tools that came before them, and not trying to reinvent the wheel, because we've got a whole number of people doing that, and that is not my intent by any means.
It's very interesting when you're saying we can accelerate learning like that, or synthesizing and thinking. I probably mentioned it a billion times, but Edgar is barely 4, and he's expected to read and write by Christmas. It's insane, but that is what education can do now. You know, and when I was 6 or something when I started, but they're doing so many clever things. For instance, he's learning to write only cursive, and it has to always start on the line. So that in itself is a bit of technology. So even if you're writing an S, you don't do that. You start on the line, you go up, and then you do the S. That is so that when you connect the letters, they're already connectable. So when you look at the shapes, they're quite clearly wrong, like a W starting down here. Everything has to start on the line, right? This is real technology. And he's learning what they call high frequency words. Every day I have to go through, and then I have to print out a new piece of paper so he doesn't memorize where it is on the sheet, which happens a lot. You know, so now he can say mom, dog, it, like. So what the heck, right? So if he can accelerate learning with technique at that age, yeah, there's got to be more things we can do. It gives me hope for the kind of things you're talking about.
Yeah, I would actually be really curious to kind of hear about any of your background with expert systems, really anyone in the room, if you've been involved in any construction or design of those, because it seems, admittedly, I've not dove deep enough into this literature, but it seems like a a hill that is generative that we can look back on, and it was just like mined for a few years, and then we stepped away from it as really trying to drive forward expert systems. So does anyone have experience kind of designing or building those here?
Hey Siri, what is a blue whale? That's an expert system.
Here's some information.
Right. I mean, I'm jokingly saying that's kind of gone mainstream, but not very well. You know, we can get expert information, but one thing. You know, Adam Chyer, who invented Siri, when he went over to do the Bixby, then his example is, find me a place that sells red wine on the way to my brother this evening that goes well with fish.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his example of all these things going together, and you're beginning to have a little bit, but you know, yeah, Mark.
No, this is prompted by Brennan's question. One bit that has been missing when we stepped away, and I sort of think I know why, is writing for others rather than self. So I'm seeing this a lot. I'm seeing the waves of new people basically who've come to Obsidian and read, and they've just discovered Nirvana because they don't know where the prehistory. And it's actually they're really primitive systems compared to, you know, the broader thing. But what's really interesting is what screams out of it. It's normally me. Why I can't do this? It should look like this. And but that's fine if it's for your personal knowledge management and you are never going to share with anyone ever. That's cool. But actually, I think that's where most of us are. And the one really missing part I keep seeing in things is writing for other people. And this is really interesting when you get into the sort of thing you were mentioning of what I suppose I might call transmediation now. I mean, in a sense that you're going to write something now, unless it's either a sort of finished novel or something, or it's a step-by-step checklist where, you know, you can't futz around with the order. But within any organization, be it whether it's public or private or whatever, you know, you're going to write stuff. It's going to be used in a different way. And the thing that really interests me, which sort of is decomposing down from the level that Frode's been looking at with documents and augmenting those, is saying, well, okay, if I know that thing that I'm writing is effectively going to be chopped up every which way and fed into all sorts of stuff, how do I make the parts of the document more aware so they can be reassembled coherently, either by a human or a non-human actor in the process, in a way that's actually informative and useful? And that then reflects back on, okay, so what does that say about the tools we use? Because I don't think it's as simple as I write my story end to end and then computer fixes it. There's a bit more to it than that. Everything I've touched in all the various careers I've had along the way have always involved some human supervision of the machines, because they're clever, but they're not that clever, and they are getting clever all the time. But that shouldn't lead us to the hubris of assuming, well, you know, let's just take our hands off the wheel and fall asleep because heck, they're in charge of what could possibly go wrong. So, you know, it's so where do we make the space also for the human in things? Where do we allow for us to use our skills that we haven't yet managed to replicate usefully? In other words, why don't we find ways to use the skills that we have that our systems don't, so that we can concentrate on doing more of that, rather than just sort of, there is a sense at the moment where the state of the art seems to be dump everything in a bucket and do a search, and then sort of magic cloud in a computer somewhere will yield answer. And I still remain, despite all the advances, I still don't see anyone breaking out of that paradigm. Which makes the point. So where does, what's the point of being a human in that then?
Yeah, it does not really support the retrieval process to go about it. And that's kind of a felt problem personally when I am constructing, building my own knowledge. We talked about this a little bit last week with Vince around the methodologies of writing. And I know Bob Horn had done a lot of work around structured writing. I suppose again, I'm not as advanced in my studies in this field quite yet. But I'm curious, what functions of those processes have been brought into software that you've seen that have afforded views? And Frode, I've seen, what we've done, what you've done with author, reader, and being able to actually, change the views that a reader can actually see, and that's helpful. I'm wondering what of those functions has been brought into your annotation systems or knowledge management tools.
I don't have any knowledge of annotation systems. I haven't, on purpose, I haven't looked very far because that means I have to start building and I can't do that yet. So I'm quite ignorant. But first, to take issue with Mark's point, I don't think anybody can write for themselves only because yourself in a year is different. There is, for exactly the reason you said, how are you going to find stuff? Because it's almost like a new person looking at it.
Well, that's why my point that I think it's hubristic to think like that. But that's what, when you hear people talk about what they do, that you're absolutely right. I mean, because you aren't right. I mean, even if you're writing for yourself a year hence. So part of our education is to educate ourselves out of this complete hubris of thinking that, I do this magical thing and then something else just takes over. And
but
we don't do that. We don't do that in most of our creative work. Why do we do it in our writing? I don't know.
Well, one of the things, Brendan, I think people spin a lot on, and it's spinning differently now, but it's spinning the last couple of decades that I can remember, is first of all, this notion of knowledge. I don't think there is such a thing as knowledge in general or information in general. I think it has to be specific. So once we start generalizing it, it's like talking about good and bad art without having a painting in front of us.
Sure.
It just has absolutely no meaning. So when it then comes to learning, what are we talking about? Are we talking about learning to pass an exam, which is very different from learning out of curiosity, which is very different from learning to produce a work, whether it's a movie or book or whatever. So I think some of these systems are, just like Mark keeps saying again and again, and I agree with him again and again, they're buckets. It's like extra memory for our brains, but it's not really extra memory. Socrates would say it's a method for reminiscence rather than memory. So that's why when you talk about expert systems, that's such an interesting area to look at, because it's, I guess, an idealized system would be to try to build an avatar of oneself for oneself. Like, I want to teach this system what I learn so that I can later, if I forget something, get it back out, right?
At the time it was needed. Yeah, I feel like that adds up. With regards to the statement around knowledge, I think that the area of focus that I've kind of narrowed myself into, and it's really just by my own interest, is in innovation. And so knowledge that's created to advance technology in some sense. And I realize that because that's really all that I end up reading. I look at the books on my shelf, and they are all kind of stemmed in that area. The things that I read online, the white papers and such, all kind of rooted in that same aspect. So I am kind of a man on the search for exactly what knowledge I'm trying to kind of form in myself, but it's almost the study of innovation through that lens that has at least offered me a perspective.
Yeah, because, Mark.
I just think it's so. I take Fred's point about knowledge. I think it's a very over-egged term. So, and thinking on what Brendan's just said, yeah, I mean, I have a sort of similar interest. So what do we call the act of effectively making new understandings? I mean, some people would say that's creating knowledge, and I take your point that you could say that, well, knowledge has to be in a context. So I'm not particularly driven anyway by the definitions of the word. I mean, I know what the thing is when I see it. So on one level, I'm quite happy to sort of, I've been doing this long enough that I'm happy to float on without having the cover of something to call it. But it's also true in the way that knowledge is now an almost debased term in the way it's been appropriated by a number of sort of quite long-standing activities with very different terms. You could say, management accounting / management consultancy, which is all about, how much can I charge people for stuff I think I own, which is very different from, say, what Brendan was just referring to, which is saying, okay, so how do we make the tools better? Which, very much goes back to what Doug was saying. Let's look for the things that we can scale to enable more people.
It depends what you're building. I don't think knowledge in this context isn't necessarily debased, but that maybe I'm overly cultured by my culture. And this very famous Norwegian story, maybe Scandinavian, is these people talking politics, and all kinds of politics back and forth. And then at the end, you realize that they're actually just workers making tin cans. So the joke is, why are they talking politics? They have no influence and no say. They're just wasting their time being pretentious little twats, which I think is inherently a horrible position to have. If you can't have a functioning democracy if you don't have a dialogue at every level. But I remember my father saying, mentioning that when my brother and I would bring up politics at the dinner table, for instance. He would just bring up the title of this play. I can't even translate it. What I mean, though, is also my ex-wife's granny used to say that thinking too much is just mind masturbation. That's why I'm thinking product. Why do people want to deal with this knowledge? I think if it's a student or Adam who is learning for his own intellect, or someone building a house, like we're talking about tools, if you want to build a house, where the house is going to be built and what it's going to be used for requires different tools, both in physical and mental and so on. That's why the generalization of knowledge I find to be obfuscating rather than getting something deeper. So Brendan, tell us more about what kind of knowledge work you're looking at.
So a call out there to refine. Mark, to the point that you had raised, I think that we call this kind of form of creating something new synthesis. And that's really kind of the aspect that we're looking into, is the processes for people of how they construct a new whole that is integrated from the research they read, the data that they're able to pull and analyze and so forth, and create something new from it. So that would be more of a elaborate description, Frode, of kind of the specifics, but namely around, I suppose my own interests are within the realm of designers, being one myself. So how we advance designers' ability to create new things. And that's extremely broad, from kind of a baseline that's attempting to be broad, because we're trying to uncover what processes do go in that we can generalize and find patterns in. And yeah.
No, sorry, I was just going to look up something while I'm listening to you. A new word I learned recently. Sorry, please go on.
Yeah, that's essentially the gist. What steps do we all take in our pursuit of creating new things? And so, Adam, when you are assessing, just to come back to the Monday call, talking through, the tree structure that Peter had kind of drawn through, and how do you get to the point with your own tacit knowledge that you can say, that's going to be far too complicated to bring out into a prototype form, or wow, there is something there that is generative that we want to look into more. I need to spend some time actually building this out and testing it to see if it affords new functionality, if it simplifies our experience, if it creates something new for the end user. And that's like the gist of what I'm seeking to find out. What steps go through your head to actually get there, and what processes do you take? And expert level knowledge or tacit knowledge is notoriously difficult to extract. There's a large field of study and a ton of military funding around this, because we are always seeking to improve our expertise in that level. But it's still an unknown. It's an area that is very ripe for research. So that's the state of things.
I was looking up, I learned a new kind of a concept map, but I can't find it now. It's something starts with a W.
Wordly map.
Of course, you would know it. And I find that really, really interesting because it's trying to solve one specific problem. So if somebody develops something like that specifically for design thinking, you know, because design principles, you know, broaden your things, focus down, look back, and all of that stuff. Yeah, Adam, you know about this.
This was more a response to Brandon, or a question for the group and Brandon. So to me, there is a great difference between seeking knowing things well and seeking new refinements or new changes to something that is used everywhere and all the time. So small changes there can have enormous results just by reducing friction for something. If we do something all the time, small changes to a line of thought, an approach can really change many things. And then there is this innovation where you really are at the border of knowledge, the outside edges where you really seek new things. And there are many places that are between different fields and between different that is not maybe as much as a new edge, but between things where you combine things. So there are so many kind of innovation you can do at different levels and different places. That is one way to. I think it's worthwhile to separate those kinds of innovations because they are so different in character. Knowing things better, for example, interface design. Just changing a small thing can make things 100 times better. Or making things more automatic, quicker or more clear, or so as opposed to finding a new interface that changes everything. That is, these were a few thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, it's a great point. It remains. I continue to find that I can drill deeper and deeper into each area that I'm looking at, and I feel like that's just the natural progression of, you know, learning, is that you can find a more refined way of categorizing or breaking things up, filtering in your own mind to kind of drill into this. Because yeah, you're exactly right with regards, especially with regards to interface design. That's a great kind of dynamic, because there's the current interface that you can either, you know, add on or often better yet subtract from, and then there is the design of a brand new interface altogether, a new form, and those are two different forms of innovation.
I think this is a hugely important point, and I think that money is a part of that, but money without a boss. Because many years ago, I invented something called hyperwords, which is, it was implemented different ways, but basically WordPress plugin or web plugin, select text, get a blue dot, point to it, you get a menu for searching, references, translation, all that stuff. It was successful. It was on Mozilla. We got 1 million downloads, but then some Mozilla nerd said something in the security bit wasn't correct, so it was deleted from Mozilla, and we never made money on it, and I could not afford to start from scratch. So anyway, point is, a few years later, Microsoft Explorer had almost the same thing, but as a blue square rather than a round thing. And it did very similar things, but it was so clunky. And Yahoo had similar thing too. So I think the reason ours was better was quite simply, we didn't have a hierarchy of bosses to justify time to. I think a lot of things get clunky in a big company because, you know, you have a year's worth of the whole team doing something, and they end up with a simple solution. Bosses are going to say, where'd you spend your time? So even though, Brendan, I agree with you, reducing stuff in an interface is a good idea. It's not often possible. So funding needs to be there, but not bosses.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I can really echo that. My sort of past caught up with me this week, and someone came out of the blue, was trying to write a sort of history of my service's use of its basically its tactics, its business process, which amazingly no one bothered to write down. So I was genuinely speaking to someone now in 2021 who had no idea what was being done, 30 years ago. frightening, really. But I mean, I think that's that. I just keep it. I keep seeing it when I in various other careers since interacting with organisations, and this is also why this thing about trying to capture tacit knowledge always fails, because it's perceived as being something that somebody else does, gets a big enough bucket, puts all the stuff in the bucket, job
And then
done.
retire.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think the number of times I sat and people say, well, no, if you want to capture tacit knowledge, you can do it. It just takes some effort. It also takes a degree of leadership. So it's an organization. You have to sort of say to people, no, there will be questions and you do need to answer them. And it doesn't matter what the answer is, but there's no good saying to this person, I'm not going to talk to you. You have to harvest it. You have to make sense of it. But I was thinking, I sort of rattling around my brain with something that I think you said, Brendan, earlier, which is this thing about the difference between, well, is this too difficult to implement, or is this something I should implement? And interestingly, they're two things that often get put in opposition, which shouldn't be, because I think they draw on different areas of our expertise. You look at something, you say, okay, this is sort of really cool and it needs doing. I don't know how. And indeed, my attitude is, I don't really care whom, but yeah, if I see this happening, I'm going to put my shoulders to the wheel of it. And the other is sort of is more prosaic and closer to self. Is well, if I've got to do this, can I realistically do it, or is it too complex? But even if it's too complex, that should bleed off into the other track of saying, but actually it's a really cool idea and maybe it needs to sit out there for somebody else to pick up on and do better. I mean, I realize we live in a sort of world where there's a degree of sort of that's what I'm looking for, but opposition. People are sort of competing against one another. But nonetheless, I mean, one interesting strand, I think, through looking back at 30 years odd of now being online, is it's of all the sort of things I've been involved in along the way, it's still the one that has the most kindness of strangers in it. And that's something I think, so that's why I don't worry about the sense of, hey, this is a really cool idea. Somebody needs to do it. We just need to keep the idea alive, because someone will emerge out of the wilderness and say, I know how to do that. And if we're relaxed about, how and who, and we're not over invested in ownership, and that creeps in various ways, I fully accept. But I don't think I think sometimes we put too much of a barrier between the sort of scope, the cleverness of the idea and the implementation aspect. So really interesting things tend to get closed down really fast because it's judged in the thing of, can we get it done by this afternoon? No, we can't. Well, let's never talk of this ever again, and we'll move on to something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the teacher in me would like to say, I completely agree. This is it feels very weird for me to say that this is largely a human, not a technological problem. We do need to build better tools, no question. I'm a tool builder, of course, but I really hope that this forum, and by this I mean Future of Text, including the book, the symposium, our monthly and weekly meetings, will allow us to deal with exactly those questions, Brendan. This is supposed to be a kind, Mark said kindness of stranger. It's also a safe space. So if someone wants to go in a direction, thankfully, all of you have been really, really helpful in pushing arguments and discussions around visual meta, which I'm only now learning is actually much more complicated than I ever thought, which is fine. But, there's a certain point you go and you try to make something real and you look at it later. But so for the project you're working on, Brendan, or whatever, for us to be able to come together and ask these questions is at least half the story, because none of us here is anybody else, and, we don't care. We just, anyway.
Yeah, it's much appreciated. I told you this directly, but this environment, this space that you have crafted, it's a blast. I get to sit around and hear, a variety, anywhere from 3 to 10 absolutely brilliant people talking about their life's work and what's pressing on their minds right now, and how they're actually trying to push things forward. Get to see it and participate. That's amazing. So, Eric, you've come into a nice session of praise, but yeah, that's kind of what this meeting feels like, and being able to follow interests. So Frode, the aspect of the human in the loop, which you guys have talked about quite extensively, but that is what drives this forward.
Yeah, thank you for those kind words. I also think another word we need to accept is love. We do the work because we like the work, but we do this because we love people and we want people to be able to exist more. I don't know what movie it was that reminded me. Oh, actually, it was Sucker Punch. Have you seen Sucker Punch? Oh, you have to see Sucker Punch. On the surface, it's very simple, live action, couple of young girls running around doing anime, kicking and fighting Nazis and all kinds of stuff. But the underlying story is they're in a psychiatric hospital, and this is how they deal with in their imagination to get out. But I'll give away the ending. It's not going to ruin the movie for you. The character we've been following the whole time at the end realizes she's not the main character. So she has to sacrifice herself for someone else, which is beautiful. But at the same time, I think we should all live our lives like we're the hero. You know, get a flashy coat, speak loudly but nicely. You know, there's so many, you know, people who are angry are very loud, but so many people on the kind of softer end of the political spectrum, let's call it that, you know, we really need to get more words out there. It's really, really important. You know, when I've been doing the Future of Text this year for 10 years, as you know, and a large part of the success is I was lucky enough when I was driving in California, I called Doug's office, Mary answered the phone, I was put through to Doug, shocking, and came in to meet him, electric meeting, like my whole skeleton was electric. Became good friends, that's all nice, decided to make a little documentary and met Vint. Vint's fame that he has bestowed upon this group has been absolutely amazing. Every time I've had a symposium that was in the flesh, not just online, I've always made it really clear that the posters at the university or wherever it was were quite boring. You know, this, if you're interested in text, come. If you're interested in meeting someone who's tech famous, please stay away. And that, I think that's what creates a community. If people are there honestly because they're interested in the subject, you know, that's nice. If you're not interested, you don't need to be here, but very simple.
I think there's an interesting point there about, you know, this storied word of expert. You know, I grew up where expert meant X was an unknown quantity and spurt was a drip under pressure, you know, so stay clear, well clear of experts. Not in the sort of Donald Trump sense, but, you know, but the point is, expertise should shine out rather than someone turning up saying, I'm an expert, and then proceeding to sort of, you know, drill their finger through your chest. So that's the nice thing about open areas. And I sort of minded again when someone contacted me the other week to ask about stuff. And he said, you know, well, it's really nice of you at the time. I said, well, you asked an interesting question. Which is, you know, which I was thinking back and think, yes, that is actually how I responded to it. So I made some time to do this because I thought this is actually much more interesting. I have a piece of the jigsaw that somebody else does. I certainly don't think I have. I mean, I don't think of that as being expertise. It probably is. And so this is why the two things are interlinked and why forums like this are interesting. I have, you know, it's given me the pleasure of listening to people who know really interesting stuff that I definitely don't know, and some which I don't understand. But I take great comfort from the fact there is someone out there who understands it. So it's not resting on my shoulders, you know, to do so.
Talking of shoulders, I'm wondering what's on Peter's shoulders. Or is he making coffee?
Hasn't blinked all session.
He's got an amazing avatar.
I just got my tea.
Good. How are you, Peter?
Yeah, pretty good. Still fighting the lack of documentation on IMBA, which is really getting in my way of things. But I'm making slow progress. The trouble is, I just have to build these little experiments and test little fragments of code with slight variations over and over again until I'm able to identify what the actual behavior is, as opposed to the holes in the documentation on the main doc website. So it's slowing me down, it's frustrating, but I am making continuous, steady progress, but it's a bit of a slog through the swamp at the moment.
It's funny, Peter, because the way you speak evokes in me a kind of a cyberspace, dark background VR view of literally a web with lots of nodes and all that kind of graphy stuff. And even though that often can be an excuse for lack of structure, but if we find, because Brendan, you're talking about expert system, if we do find a way to weave our own knowledge together in a really rich visual environment, as we've been talking about for a long, long time, you know, that will be amazing. But I think we have to really heed Mark's words of, you can't put anything in there unattached. That has to be one thing. Or if you do have an inbox, you know, it has to be an inbox that, you know, it'll empty itself if you don't hurry up, or some kind of reason to contextualize or hook it in, because you know, schemas, all kinds of knowledge, pedagogical systems are based on, you can't learn something if you don't already know something about it.
No,
And of
very
course, yeah, and of course, in these incredible environments we can potentially make, we have the opportunity to do the military, what's not over there? You know, the unknown unknowns. Let's not pretend it's Rumsfeld who came up with it, because it wasn't.
It's a Johari window.
Thank you. That's exactly where it comes from.
I think I put it in the chat the other day. I've got the reference. I tracked down the reference. Yeah, it's someone you never heard of, but it's mainly known because everyone thought Rumsfeld was talking rubbish when it turns out he wasn't.
So I remember back in the 90s when I was making QuickTime movies, you know, 320, 480. Oh my, 320, 240, and 640, 480. Showing age here. Anyway, that was amazing to make happen. And now I'm watching you guys live on a screen that's the same resolution as laser printers used to be, in full color, voice, and everything. VR is going to happen very, very soon. Suddenly it'll be normal. Apple or somebody will come out. So even though it can be too much sometimes, and depending on people's hairstyles, like me, I can't put things on and off, it goes spiky. It will be solved. So we might as well start thinking in rich environments, right?
Well, I really liked the Cyberspace First Steps book. If you haven't tracked it down, really, it's worth giving a solid read to.
We have some kind of a rule about no more book mentionings.
But that was the previous book mentioned. So technically, it's an exemption to the rule because it was mentioned before.
Oh, I may have that. 36 pounds paperback. Hardcover is cheaper. Worth looking through the library first, but thank you.
When Frode mentioned sort of doing QuickTime, that my mind always flies to the thing I put in the sidebar, which is, it's lovely. It's a guy sort of drawing the animation, which was a sort of joke at its time, but he's drawing the animation, and it's basically spending his whole day getting ready to get his stuff done. And in fact, he never gets it done because he's done so many things other than doing the stuff that it's time to go to bed and rinse and repeat. Bit meta in this context.
Yeah, especially for a PhD. Adam.
So the current issue that's been driving me nuts in the user interface is that I'm trying to detect the pressing of modifier keys on the keyboard. Now the IMBA documentation suggests that all I should have to do is type @keydown dot whatever the modifier key is I want, dot whatever I want it to log, or equals whatever the function is I want to run, and it's not happening. So I'm gonna probably have to file a GitHub issue on that. But in the meantime, if anybody knows how you can tell whether the modifier keys are currently being depressed in JavaScript, I might be able to bypass IMBA and do it in JavaScript directly. So that's been irritating.
Yeah, I know that, Peter. I've used it before, so I can email you some
Oh, that would
details.
be deeply appreciated, Adam. Deeply appreciated. Because I want to know whether the option key is being held down. And if it's being held down, I want to change the behavior of my interface and have a couple quasi modes like that. But so far, it doesn't seem to want to work outside of like a text input field. I think they implemented it on that, but they didn't implement it for a general user interface. I want to know whether a modifier key is being held down on the general user interface. The closest hack I could come up with so far was that I could tell if the shift key was being held down while the cursor was in motion, because I was able to catch the mouse move events and then look for the modifier key state on the mouse move. But I don't want you to have to be moving the mouse. I want you to hold down the option key and then have the menu items change to the alternate menu item text. And if they have to have the cursor in motion, they're going to get completely freaked out, because it'll make it look like I have a voodoo monster working in the background of my interface, futzing with things. And
But Peter, you work on a Mac, right?
Yeah.
Well, from my understanding is there are a lot of issues with capturing keyboard inputs just way down. Like, yeah, anyway, so I can imagine that filters through.
Wait. I briefly, because we should get at it, but there's one app I use all the time where it actually matters when you do a modified drag, whether you press the modifier keys before or after you start the drag. I mean, how do you guess that?
Mark.
Anyway, Adam has patiently been waiting for us all.
Just really quickly, Adam, sorry. Mark, you learn to use your software. And I'm saying that from an arrogant Photoshop user perspective. In Photoshop, that's normal. If you press it before or after, that's just a common thing. How do you learn that?
No, I get that, and I have, but I'll respond on that. But I want to Adam get a word in edgeways.
Okay, yeah, Adam, sorry.
It somewhat ties together to what all of you said about knowledge and one thing, and large inboxes and knowing your Photoshop. That in digital, I really need a way to come back to things 100 times. So much is focused on new and news and updated technology and new. But for me, knowledge is often about coming back to something 100 times, or revisiting your material and looking through your pile so well that you start to know the pile of things, your inbox. So you really know in physical space, it's easier because things stay in place a bit more, and you get visually reminded just by tripping over a pile of things or seeing the books. But so more affordances to actually get information back and be reminded of your piles and see the piles more often, so they're not hidden. So you could walk around your information. And that is why I personally like the big maps where everything is actually visible, that you can navigate through them and see other things on your way to your destination. So you get reminder of the relations. And the relations, they don't have to be so logical. They just have to be there. Placed in a pile doesn't really need to be. If you have a pile of one to-do list and a few notes, they may not even relate at all, but they form something that expands your mind in new ways. So I really think the way of getting reminded, getting back to things, and really knowing things comes from revisiting it 100 or 1,000 times.
That reminds me of what I, a long time ago, called the central irony of interface design. The person who creates the presentation, back then it would have been a multimedia CD-ROM, will learn more than the user.
Yeah, and you make someone make a presentation on a topic, so at least one person knows that subject, the presenter.
Yeah. All my PowerPoint knowledge was learnt the night before a presentation, trying to write the damn presentation. But there is actually this thing about this understanding is interesting. As I listened to Peter speak earlier about the fact about documentation, and having sort of walked in that area now for, well, I suppose I've been doing ATB Ref since 2005 on almost a daily basis. It's come quite close to my heart to the challenge of writing for other people, by which I mean so that it's understandable to them, and it's trying to break out of the human weakness that what we know is incredibly obvious, and to the extent that we actually forget what was difficult, what was unguessable before we discovered it, like the keystroke I mentioned the other day. It's fine, you learn how to do it. I mean, I do think, why on earth should it matter? I mean, why didn't you just have it both ways around? Clearly, it was a technical problem somebody couldn't be asked to deal with, and they never got to tie it off. And I don't blame them for that. But it's ugly and messy. But it does speak to this thing about. So these are the sort of things that you just can't guess. And when you're writing about them, somehow these are nuances to capture. And it's something. This is why this idea of remediation and how what sort of extra metadata should attach to things, because actually you don't want to cram all this extra information in people's eyes right in the narrative of the thing they're reading. But so I find myself thinking that what I write onto the virtual page, as it were, is a fraction of what's really at work in the subject at hand. And thinking there's so much that's getting left on the cutting room floor because I have no bucket to put this in. I have no way for this to travel along in a useful and meaningful way, be it to indicate to someone that the terminology, the vernacular I used for a certain thing actually may not be the same as everyone uses. And there are other versions of this. So, straight translation might work from language to language, but there's a lovely guy who writes into one of the forms I use, and he uses Google Translate, and from his Japanese, it's beautiful to read. His lovely, lovely, lovely things are sort of translated verbatim. They're beautiful, they're so polite, they're so eloquent, but they're completely meaningless at the same time, which is the tragedy of machine translation. But it sort of shows that it's not just putting one language in for another. It's often just a word having a different meaning between different communities. And I try and pick these things up in the sort of documentation that I write. But what's really interesting is the tools at the moment have no logical place to store that, to map that out, so that it can be reused as an affordance for someone who turns up at the front gate, says, I know it's in here somewhere, I just don't know where to look. Because none of the things that I might ask for are obvious.
Japanese is a fascinating language, primarily because when people are speaking it colloquially, they'll leave out anything that can be inferred from context. So if you state everything in full, it's probably one of the easiest languages to translate. The trouble is, as it's used, so much is omitted that you need to have a massive little background tracking system running in order to maintain the contextual awareness, in order to fill in all the blanks. So some bits of Japanese where everything was expressed completely, you throw it into Google Translate and you'll actually get a readable, useful result out. But if it's some little colloquial dialogue fragment, then forget it. You're in sort of a drug-induced free association mode.
Hi, Alan. You're joining us for the last 2 minutes. I'm sure we can go a little over. But just really quickly, both on Mark's and Peter's point, David Bellows wrote a book called Is That a Fish in Your Ear? He was in one of the early futures of text about translation. And he makes the point that it's always a translation. Even in the same family, people will use language differently. And I think that really human insight is so important when we try to impose structure on things.
Yeah, and that's why the sort of having these meta systems, if we want to have documents, information, whatever, that's more sort of knowledgeable about itself, finding places to park some of this. So this is not an unknown, as you've just rightly flagged up. It's a known issue, but we're not really addressing it in our tools and systems at the moment. Or rather, we're just betting the farm that the next row of the AI dice is going to fix it. And again, I just think that's overreach.
I'm wondering if Alan has a thought on that.
Oh yeah. I was I fell into the Twitter hole this week and that topic came up. And I do have a lot of thoughts on what I assume you guys are talking about, and the funny part of our compulsion towards lexical or categorization, that this is a repeating theme that we can't just be okay with the idea of indeterminacy, even though, time and again, we've proven that like, hey, logic isn't logical. Hey, information theory only applies to signal transport, and yet still we have these Web3 enthusiasts who are like, this is going to be the future of the web. We're finally going to solve it because, guys, all we have to do is, Bitcoin is no different than talking. We just have to tie it together, and it's ridiculous.
Mr. Peter.
Yes, I'm starting to add concepts to my piece for the next future of text. And I'm wondering what's going to happen if more than one contributor has a definition of the same concept.
I haven't decided on that yet. So far, the concepts, not many have gone in, but if you guys can be bothered, please do. So far, they're just listed underneath like a dead reference or notes with concern for how we're going to use it. And I was just about to bring up a related thing, which is how we choose to define a volume or a wrapping. We've talked about it before. But Alan, one thing that's changed since you were here last, changed in this hour really, is we're not going to have a volume 2 of the future of text. We're going to have an edition 2, because there are only about 13 new articles in the new one. So therefore, I'm taking everything out of InDesign, putting it into Author, trying to encode everything so it'll be properly readable in Reader. So the visual meta will be pure for the whole thing. All the articles for edition 2 will be in a separate section at the back, so to speak. The original timeline will go and so on. So then the question becomes, yes, it's not too hard to cite a specific contributor. Visual Meta takes care of that. But how do you deal with the references? Currently, I'm just planning for them to be at the back for everybody. But exactly what Peter's saying, how do you deal with different people's defined concepts? And also how, in something like Adam's world, how can you break this up? If in an academic journal, the way it is currently, it's really weird. If let's say one of Mark's articles, I go to ACM and I download it, I get just that article. To get the whole issue is actually a bit difficult.
Yeah.
And I can't just read his thing and then virtually fold it out. So I think the segmentation, the folding, the combining, like an EDL, is really, really an important part of what we're talking about. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, I read a very interesting piece on constructing thesauruses a while back, and maybe we could add a context field to the concept definition dialog box.
Wait, say that again? Add a what?
Add a context field to the concept definition dialog box.
Oh, right. Okay, that's interesting.
And then we could also have a broader concept, and that would let us start training the different broader context. So you could start building the hierarchy of contexts in which you could have the concepts so that they wouldn't be running on top of each other. And then if you're looking for a particular concept, you could get like a little menu showing you, here are the contexts in which this concept has appeared. So one might be, programming language design. Another one, the exact same concept could appear in technical writing, and it could also appear in hermeneutics. And then you'd be able to pick which one of the context you were interested in the concept in to get to the correct one.
But wouldn't that be just as hard to just as you may have different concepts, same word for different concept? Wouldn't the contexts be just as hard to pin down by Frode or by the authors to find a unified context vocabulary?
Yeah, basically we have a thesaurus construction problem here. So it's worth taking a look at the thesaurus literature and what the information retrieval community has done in that area and see if we can leverage some of that work.
I think we have an interaction issue, but Alan.
All right, I'm going to throw a little spitfire crazy ideas. One, I think sometimes these problems, we're imagining them in this chamber, but we're not going to really be able to prove them out unless we get more interaction. And so referring to the future of text, I guess maybe I've been thinking about this for a little while. My first thought a bit ago is if there was a way to freely access, like just go to a website and be able to see some of these things that were written for future of text at any given time, then you could do a couple of things. The first thought would be to get more engagement across the board. I think it would not be too difficult to try out like a newsletter, a future of text, that even just pulls in these snippets from volume 1, this second edition, and then links to this public forum where you don't get the same experience as author or reader, right? But you do maybe get to, you have an interface that's powered by visual meta, so you can see and transcribe, and that's another matter to figure out how to do that. But the point would be, one, through like a newsletter, get more involvement, and then try and bring people into the site and actually not only have a place where they can perhaps build out the data, but then very easily say, I wish it could do this here, or this is what I like, an extra feedback form. And then the second thought is just one of the things I've been playing with in Readwise as far as tags and labels.
Will you remember that? Can I address the first one? But while we're still
please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this is very much the whole wrapping thing. Yes, I think this is so important. We are doing, we're doing Twitter and we're doing Instagram now. Raphael and Laura are helping do that every single day. So that's a detail of what you're talking about. But a newsletter is something we're thinking about. We may do an article a day to subscribers or so on. But if there was a mechanism, even if it was a URL or a DOI or whatever thing we invent in there that essentially says open up the volume, that would be really, really important. But hopefully, if they've made annotations on that, it shouldn't go away. It shouldn't just be go somewhere else. It should be almost magically like this, right?
Are we talking about opening up within the app or going to a site and seeing it? Because I think those are two very different requests on the user.
I agree. In a way, I don't care. But what I mean is, even if you get it textual in an email, just email text, not PDF, not web, nothing. If there is a thingamajig that you can interact with, if it opens through a web server, that's fine. If it's on a web page, that's fine. But you have the means to get the full PDF document. I think it should go back to the document, but very often, even the document can be interacted on a website. I don't mind. That's not the point. But the point is, how does this fit in the work?
This is great. But let's make this happen. I can help on the website side, on the newsletter side, whatever. But it would be a great experiment, first off. But I also think that there's a groundswell of interest in whatever it's called, tools for thought or anything, and it can be encapsulated within the future of text. So I think that like we're sitting on oil.
So what is the magic? What is the magic? So with Doug, one of the things that was very exciting, most of you obviously know Doug's work, and one of the things is in NLS, you would type a command that would come out like this. And you would encode a view, like you would do V, and then you would do O. So that would say view is outline. So it's quite simple. Anybody could learn it. It was well done. But the key is, what I realized, you could take that definition, outline level 1, whatever, put it at the end of a URL. So if the web browser had a plugin to read that, it could render the document according to those rules. So as you all know here, obviously, you can store a hell of a lot of variables in a URL. That's my point, right?
Yeah.
But then you have to have the web server for that. But is there a way we can do that here so that when you get this URL thing, it is constructed so it knows to open and to give access to these other things? But if that web server doesn't exist, can that bit still be used somehow?
I don't understand. To answer the first part is yes, we can do that. Like we could build that into the URL and show an outline form of an article that they can switch on and off, from a website. But what's the second part? I'm missing that.
Well, the second part is, okay, so Christopher Guttridge is a genius and an idiot for not believing in visual meta. Chris, I hope you watch this. You're a dear friend. Mark Anderson and him and I had a long running. Anyway, one of the things Chris really agreed on is the idea that addressing needs to be robust, right? So if you are having a citation in an ideal world, you would have information about the publication, but also a URL, also a DOI, also a relative thing, many ways to get to it. That makes sense, right? So what I'm saying here is imagine you have received an email from an article that was in the book, and at the end, there's something that looks like a URL. And if there is a web server that is alive for it, remember this has to work in 200 years. Great. You go to that, you can download the PDF or do whatever the interaction cool thing that's knowledgeable. But if that server is dead, is there a way that maybe underneath that URL, there is a description? It says something like, search for the book that is a PDF called blah, 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 dot PDF. This originally appeared on page 34, blah, blah, blah. So it is just a command. It isn't esoteric, but it can be used by, it could even be opened in a web browser. And if there's nothing there, like I've seen Adam, you all do the same thing. You can do a local server, 808 or whatever it's called, right? A port.
Okay, so here's how I would handle what I'm hearing. Here's how I would handle that as a product or an MVP. With the newsletter, you have a link. The link goes to the site, Future of Text, to that article, right? You also have a way to log in. And once you log in, or either on that article page or on your own, here's an article that I want to save. That's where you get all these variants, right? Because then we own the geography there. We can change if there's a problem with the logic of the query, we can change it. You can't do that in email. So with email, I would just keep it very simple. This is going to go to a site, even if that site's not around in 5 years. In that site itself is where you have all these different formats. And then that really opens the door to iterative testing.
Well, imagine if you have, imagine if you have email visual meta. So we include visual meta at the bottom of the email, right? And it has a simple field that says, this is page 5 of an article called this name, which is unique because of the structure it's made with a date and all that, VMID nonsense. Next line says exactly the same thing, but it has a full URL in case the URL works. So that's the beginning of it. But what I really think we need is for the thing in a human readable way to say, this article was page so-and-so of this document. Go find it. Use Bing or Google or whatever, go find it.
And is it important to you that occurs within an email?
It should ideally work everywhere, even if it is something that the user has to copy and paste into a web browser. We should do it in different ways. I could imagine you get it at the end. There's a bit, there's like, why is there all that gibberish? And you can actually, as a normally quote unquote intelligent person, say, it actually says original article is. And okay, I can actually manually now go and get it and reconstruct it if I have to. But one of the lines, it is such as, oh, wait a minute, I dragged this into my browser. Do you remember bookmarklets?
Yeah,
a bit of
vaguely.
IT, right?
Would you be, does that feel like a must-have for a newsletter to at all be worth it? Or is that something that could come out 3 months later after a newsletter has been going, even though, does that make sense? Is that critical to the idea of the newsletter?
No, it's not. Almost nothing is critical. As long as we keep this dialogue going and the dialogue is recorded as we're doing, it'll have benefit for someone at some point in some way. But I think it could provide, because we keep hearing the things that knowledge is context and all of that stuff in the relationship and how important it is. And then we still send out dumb, isolated things.
Yes.
Right. So if we make an effort, and in the early stages, just document how we're trying to make the efforts of having literally a springboard. Boing, oh, here it is. Minority report, move things around and stuff.
Yeah.
You're sending one piece of the jigsaw with a thing on the back saying, the whole box is available here. So that this is this point of the message, isn't it? It knows it's part of something. It's supplying or in this case, the means in which by which you're being informed.
Hang on a second, Mark.
A whole.
Your big brain that just teleported a little thought into my head. Basically, we're talking about citing itself, aren't we?
In a way.
Right? So if we have a way for this to easily say with a VMID or whatever, that this is actually part of this document page so-and-so, 99% of this is done. You click on that thing, it opens, downloads and opens it to that page. That's almost the same as an unfolding, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
The thing I put in the sidebar is it felt like the thing you mentioned earlier is almost like some way to have like a client side 404 message. In other words, if I can't reach the server at all, there's something, because the thing is, if the system normally works, you get to the server and the server says, there's nothing here, or the internet says the server doesn't exist. So what your alternate message to me implied was a way to say to the person, okay, so there's nothing where it ought to be, but here is another way that you may be able to find that resource.
Yeah, exactly.
How you do that, I don't know. That's not.
We've solved that because DOIs exist. DOIs have two functions, obviously. One is an actual website that you can download if that is still alive. The other one is it is a unique number. So if it doesn't exist, you can just Google it. So we have VMID, which is just date and time and whatever, which is close to being unique. So it just means that if the web server is down, look for it here on page so-and-so. I mean, you guys are much cleverer than me in this. Is there a command where you can tell? Of course you can. Okay, if you send something to a web browser, it searches for it. If you have make it execute, right? I mean, that's how Liquid works. So imagine if this was a kind of a link that opens in the web browser, and it doesn't go somewhere, it just issues a search. If it issues a search for that document and it's right there, that's a huge step of the way, isn't it?
Depends on how readable you want it, because URLs are quite cryptic for most people. If you imagine an ordinary person while having a list with the keyword kind of visual meta, but even simpler, maybe removing the brackets would be simpler. Page : 34 to 36 is very readable. Deciphering URL is not for everyone in the future, maybe.
No, sorry, Adam.
Yeah, so the question is, should you duplicate that information in a readable way for the user so they can find it way later when the server is down and domains are no longer more?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, imagine at the bottom of this email, and I saw the issues with email, I completely agree, but this is just to make it so it's not even PDF, simplest way. It has this article or document or whatever we call it is a part of : below that URL, below that a searchy kind of thing, below that what looks like a citation. If it's 3 or 4 different ways to get the same thing for basically different levels of reader, from human who clicks a link to programmatic to human who reads it and has to type it in something else, that's fine, right, guys? It doesn't have to be just in one thing.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of the micro card format, where you can get someone's personal information in various different ways, and you download it, and then you can use it however you want.
Yeah, that sounds yes. Peter.
Yes, I was thinking maybe the first time reader or author sees a new visual meta ID, it could go and make sure that the Internet Archive has saved a copy of that page, so that we'll be able to go back and get it. I've had a few cases where I'll find a website, it'll be a dead link, so I'll go into the Internet Archive and oh good, there's part of the site there. However, the critical page that I'm looking for was never crawled by the Internet Archive, and it suggests, would you like to have me archive it now? Well, you can't archive it now because now it's offline. The time to have archived it would have been to tell it to archive it when the page came to my attention and it started to first matter to me.
I think that's nice. Even though we have a good relationship with some of the people at the Internet Archive, To have that universally available to put stuff on their server is a bit questionable. Plus, they're going to go down in a couple of 100 years too, maybe.
Ooh.
So, as one additional thing. But so, Alan, you have a concern about emails.
Oh, that's just the benefit of working at Twilio, which is now SendGrid, is I get a small taste of reputation management and spam and all of these things that go into
That's
preventing emails from going through. So I think defaulting, at least at the beginning, to the almost think of it as a separate project from the core Future of Text project. Like, even if the newsletter was like, hey, we had a talk this week, here's some books we mentioned, right? Just something regular to gain subscriptions, whatever, and then bring them to this place where we can experiment, would get across what I was trying to get across.
Yeah, we can do that, and maybe we focus on that on Monday, because we're way over and it's Friday, and we have unfortunately a whole additional family on this end. But guys, should we try to experiment with this? Should we try to send out one random email and try us to put stuff at the end of it that allows this thing to happen?
I don't think so.
Oh, what should we do?
Sorry. I mean,
No.
and
You're not being yeah, go on.
well, so it's definitely worth talking about more. I would personally, I would say, let's put the experiments in a dashboard that someone goes to from the email, right? And that's where we could try that out. And if we want to try out those experiments, I would suggest like a different newsletter, a different email that can get polluted without losing, without basically getting blacklisted. Yeah,
there is an issue with that, because I mean, I don't mind. I mean, there are email mailing lists systems we can use, as long as people have given permission and all of that. So even I know some of those issues. They are more, as you're pointing out. But wouldn't it make sense that if people subscribe, we, at the bottom of those emails, we say, what follows below is an experiment in the future of text that attempts to do the following. So it's not just tech junk that looks weird. It's actually part of the effort of doing something.
But isn't the issue, if I'm following right, the issue here, it's sort of context. So there is a payload, and the question is, do you read the payload in the email and then follow the link to it? Or do you create the expectation that the payload sits at the end? This is the email is just one of many ways of call to arms to look at a web server in today's technology, which I think is what, if I understood, is really what Alan was alluding to on the grounds of the fragility of emails. I'm 63. I'm aware that probably, or those of a certain age are sort of inured to, a newsletter is something that brings you something that you read and then maybe follow, and so this is a slight shift, but that doesn't really bother me, because the interest will come if the payoff is that you get to the place, you find interesting stuff, you're going to go. I don't think whatever my habits are, that I'm overly invested on whether I read. I start consuming the content of the message in my email client, or having followed a link to where it resides. But I can see that the latter is probably better for us in the long term.
I mean, I think Alan's points are good about, in terms of marketing in the community, and I do think that is where we need to focus. Clicking on a link adds friction. And we have to kind of make it worth their while. What are we expecting people to read an entire article in an email, or are we expecting the beginning bit and then click here to read more?
An email should be thought of. Sorry, we can talk about this later, but it maybe even, because I have a hard time joining on Monday, maybe in another format. But I think it would be healthy to imagine the newsletter as a separate, agenda. Containing a whole article is not going to get read. Like, the first step for thinking of a newsletter is, what is the mentality of the audience? And so small snippets, something that they can read on their way to work, 3 points, 3 interesting things. That's the 95% of the 20% that are even going to open the email are going to want in a newsletter.
So
and then
we
that
have,
small percentage is going to get deeper.
So we have a Twitter and Instagram account that does that. It gives a bit of a taster.
Mhm.
That's been set up over the last 2 weeks with Raphael, with help from Laura. To extend that into email probably won't be that hard. Somebody will have to set up a good email mailing lists software that has all the right permissions and so on.
Yeah, the advantage of stuff like Substack or there are other ones that are freer is that it's easy to go back and see an archive of the newsletters. So if something does seriously interest you, you go back and you can get this trail. Then you start to get deeper in, which is cool.
Well, yeah, but also that's the book, isn't it?
Right, but we have to get them through a channel they're familiar with before we can make the case for the book for some people. I even think that it would be awesome. Well, this is obviously a talk for another time. It's getting.
Who wants to schedule a meeting for how to organize a newsletter type reach outs to the community? Oh, I have to go. Alan, maybe you would take the lead in suggesting a time, maybe next week, see who can fit.
Yeah, I can. Is anyone open on the weekends? For me, the next 2 weeks are going to be pretty chock full. Okay, Brendan, great.
My weekends are quite constrained, next couple actually.
Okay. Let me think about that. And I'm good on the weekends, but I think we could also find something that's a little more asynchronous for us to get through this.
I can be part of a meeting at the same time. We usually, as in starting an hour and a half ago on Sunday.
I have to check on Sunday. There are 2 things I was just doing Sunday, but you said an hour and a half ago, so 11:30.
How does that relate to an hour and a half ago? Because you're in a different time zone.
It's 12:30 right now, so it would be 11. That's what you're talking about.
Okay, so it's the same time as we would normally start on this. Okay. All right, I'll be there. Whoever can be there, excellent. I can't be there very long. We have a situation thing this weekend, but yeah, that'd be very, very cool. I'm all wedded to PDF, so when someone tears me into different text, I should follow. We should
Sounds good.
Use all the media. All right, thanks, guys. It was different today, as always. I look forward to Sunday and Monday.
Have a good weekend.
See you. Bye, everybody.